Basically, when we looked at, I have been working on disaster risk communication, or now the term is emergency risk communication for many, many years. So this COVID problem is a subset of that. And when we look at the SDGs, you can see that there's a whole range of SDGs that are affected by effective or not effective risk communication, including, of course, the most important one, which is SDG 1, which is a world without poverty. So I won't go into particular analysis of the SDGs per se, because it's across a number of these. The basic structure, so we are going to present to you some ongoing research. As the title says, it's preliminary finding. So the basic structure of what we are going to present is that we will be looking at the most authoritative risk communication practice recommendations. These are based on systematic reviews of extant research. Then, so this part I will do, and then my colleague Ramati will talk about the actual practices of 3 Asian countries with relatively good but different forms of COVID-19 management. How well are they following the recommendations based on evidence? That's the material we can talk about at this point. We'll be doing further analysis of these and other countries in the Asia Pacific, analysis of social media messaging using the access that we have obtained to something called CrowdTangle, a particular analytical window that we have from on Facebook messages. And also we are looking at the Gallup Wellcome Global Monitor, which is doing worldwide quantitative assessments of trust in government, in health authorities, in politicians, and so on. And we plan to compile all this into a comprehensive report by the end of 2021. So if you look at the overall problem is one of requiring preventive behavior actions by the public. So citizens must comply with the directions. Now, as we are coming into the vaccination stage, we're going to have 2-stage vaccinations, and it's going to be wasted resources if the people do not take the first vaccination and the second vaccination. So as you know from having various foreign substances injected into your body, this would involve questions of trust. That has been the reason we are focusing on trust. If you look at the overall problem, people will respond to risk as they perceive it. I mean, there's no sort of standard way that people respond to risk. It depends on their perception. They verify their perception by various means, including confirmation from other sources, their experiences, and so on. And they're likely to take the actions, which is what we are really aiming for, if they understand that they're vulnerable to the risk, that there is a course of action that they can take to reduce that vulnerability, and that the advantages of the said actions are greater than the potential drawbacks. So we ask the question, who is it who's communicating? And whose directions are these communicators likely to heed? So if you take the larger question of disaster response, you have disaster management professionals, various people from government, etc. In the case of COVID-19 throughout the world, what we found is that it's mostly health officials. In some instances, you have political leaders such as Angela Merkel and New Zealand's Jacinda Ahern, making periodic statements, but generally they don't do it every day. The regular communication tends to be by health officials. In unusual cases, like in Sri Lanka, in the second wave, we had, in the first wave, we had health officials as a primary response. That's the one that we'll be describing. But in the second wave, it's the military commander who has been making the formal announcements. So anyway, we looked at the health authorities, and obviously the people that they pay attention to are the WHO. So in 2017, a research synthesis had been conducted, a massive effort, and a risk communication booklet had been produced and shared throughout the world. The research was supervised by very high caliber expert groups, and the work on compiling the extant research was done in various places. Most of the research that we'll be talking about appear to have come from the Wayne State University in Michigan, in the United States. But Harvard and various other people have also contributed to the research questions formulated by the expert group. Now, we ourselves at Learn Asia have been working on systematic reviews from 2013, including publishing a special section with articles about research on the effects of mobile phones in rural areas, on education, on financial transactions, and so on. So we are very aware of this, and we are very happy to see that, say, one of the weaknesses that we had, which is that we were working only with English language, and the WHO research actually covers all 5 languages: Russian, Chinese, French, Spanish, and so on. We were also at the stage that we were in, we were working primarily with quantitative studies, but now the field has moved on, and they are bringing in quantitative studies as well as qualitative studies. So this is quite comprehensive, and I would encourage anyone who's interested to go into these sites, and all this information is available online. So let's look at the WHO recommendations. What is the WHO saying? You can see that the recommendations are presented as A, B, C, and so on. So right at the top, A is about trust. And we are quite interested in the trust issue. So here you can see, I'm not going to go through all the list. You can see it on the slide. They're talking about using multiple platforms. So we go back to that question of people trying to verify. You get the news on one thing and you're trying to verify it on something else. It has to be timely. It must acknowledge uncertainty, and so on. And the whole problem of communicating uncertainty. Because as you can see, at the beginning of COVID, we had a lot of uncertainty about whether it was carried by aerosols, whether it was coming from surfaces, and so on. And those things have to be dealt with. Now let's look at the underlying research. The underlying research from the systematic reviews is summarized as follows. So the research shows, now we are not just asserting, but we are doing a very systematic compilation of large amounts of research. And for those of you who have done literature reviews for various purposes, we describe systematic reviews as literature reviews on steroids. This is quite a comprehensive kind of approach using the capabilities of information technology. So they pull a large number of research findings. And one of the, of course, the difficulties with trust, of course, is that it's the context. So some of the cautious generalizations are that it's important that different parts of government and the media should communicate the same message. Swift responses are needed, because otherwise the rumors take hold and then you're responding to them. And the importance of dealing with uncertainty, negative data, and things of that nature. So high trust can lead to higher vaccination and evacuation behaviors, but it can also lead to carelessness in terms of perceiving lower risks. So now we are in the finance, strategic communication planning, evaluation, and social media. So we have a particular interest in social media, and I think everybody does. So we looked at the social media recommendations. Of course, they say you should engage with social media and that you should have an integrated strategy. And the research finding behind it is that this is an area that's very difficult because actually the research is ongoing and unformed and so on. So one of the things that they find is that they have not become routine practices within government. So there is a lot of variability in the way these things are being handled. So for example, you'll see how Taiwan, Singapore, and Sri Lanka are dealing with it. They also talk about big data analysis. Now that we find quite interesting because that's something we will be doing in the coming year. So these are the main issues that I'd like to cover. Risk should be explained not in technical terms. Consistent messages should come from different sources, and early messages should, so those with the communication background, you'll find that this is the main area, and the last slide that I will deal with is the research behind this. So here, of course, probabilistic and technical terms are a problem, even though many in the scientific fields, we tend to talk about that when we are dealing with uncertainty. There is the emphasis that is given on public health officials. Traditional mass media are very impactful. Messages should come from multiple sources. So you can see that this is not contrary to what we have been talking about so